Welcome to Flane. Today we're going to talk about a provocative statement, which is it's all about the people, meaning that no process or set of rules, none of that stuff matters. What really matters is the people. So it all comes down to the people. And what underlies that is if you think of any process or any set of rules within a company, it all fundamentally comes down to people. That people, the culture doesn't change, processes don't change. Nothing in a company changes unless people actually do it. And I don't know because I don't know where we've talked, I don't know when we've published these things, but we had a guest on and we talked about the fact that he's got the force of the law behind him. And when he goes in to change things, and even there, when you have the force of the law, that's great. But if people don't change between the ears and they don't actually change what they believe and the way that they think, no change happens. And so one of the things that drives that is I think that when we talk about coaching, there's a whole debate about what is agile coaching. And, so what is agile coaching and what does that mean? Professional coaching in the business sense is a very new thing. So I like to look to parallels to think places that have had coaching for a very long time, like sports. And so you look at someone like John Wooden, one of the winningest basketball coaches in college basketball history in the United States. His disciples say that while he coached basketball, he didn't actually coach, he didn't teach basketball, he taught life. And you start looking at all these systems, like even in the military, where they don't have coaches, but they have things like drill sergeants, et cetera. You look at the rituals that they do, it's really about building character and building people. And that's the fundamental building block. So I'm gonna leave it there to set the topic is that the fundamental building block is people. And I might flash up on the screen John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. He talks, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom is all people stuff. It's all character. In the middle, there's like skill, right? Skill comes in the middle. It doesn't come at the bottom. And it's not even at the top. At the top is greatness and achieving results. So the skill is not even the first thing that you have to come to. So there you go. That's the topic. And since we kick to people these days, we decided that. So, Sanjuri, I'll kick to you to start your reflections on what I just said, and we'll go from there. And I'll start the timer.
Yay, yay. Well, funny enough, I just had to deal with the what is, the organization around the Olympics in Paris. And so that's looking at people.
Envious. I'm envious you get to see that, Sanjuri.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
People would trade places for you for a heartbeat in a heartbeat right now, trust me. But yeah, I think it's interesting to look at social behavior. When you look at a group of people in a specific setting, be it at the office or the Olympics or in a family or taking a trip or hiking Mount Everest, and how the dynamics that allow for those people to have a specific purpose or means to why they're together and for the time that they're going to be together, and then how they navigate that. So I think for me, obviously, yes, it is definitely always about the people, but I think there's some abstract, unseen, invisible glue there, right? Which can either create those reinforcing bonds and behaviors to, help get to whatever that collective purpose is. Sometimes it's not even defined. And I think, I think it's some of those elements, around purpose, around values, around, beliefs, norms, whatever, and how, the type of rules, processes, or whatever which come afterwards, once I've defined my purpose and my mindset, my beliefs, et cetera, that help create, all that invisible glue that then dictates what that environment is, right? And I do believe that, you don't change people, but I do believe that environments can change behavior, right? And so I mean, I do agree it's all about the people, but I think sometimes when we tell organizations that, it's like, what's that first step, to nudging behavior, to nudging people, and it's like, yeah, people at some point, are brought together by community, and so, much as, we're very social beings, so the notion of community, being part of a group, and for that group to have a clarified purpose and reason to go where they need to go, that kind of drives everything, and then from there, everything trickles down from there. So I do think that, I do believe it's all about humans, but does have to be some social construct, right? That sort of binds and brings all that together, and then dictates behavior and processes, or whatever you want to call it, you know.
So Matt, I'm
That's
curious because before we talking about what St. Jerry's talking about, before we hit record, and before St. Jerry joined, you and I were talking, and you were talking about how folks start to realize that the way you do Kanban is really about culture change. So that is a process leading to, right, changing culture, and culture, in my opinion, doesn't change unless the people themselves change. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is what we witness, isn't it? Because we do talk about changing culture, but we were talking about society, and we were talking about the rules of society, and legislating and creating laws and things like that to create boundaries that people live within. And we vote for people who debate what should become law, and then they set these laws, which are rules, which is saying this is what our nation or community will tolerate, and those are our boundaries, those are our rules, this is how we should behave. But as we were saying before, but we still have criminals. There are still people who live outside of those. There are still people that don't see those rules as applying to them, or see them as a challenge, or see them as a game, or just disagree with them, or feel disengaged from the set of people who made those decisions on their behalf. Because it could be like, because voter turnout is really low. So I didn't vote for you. You're making these rules. You're not speaking for me. So I think it's just a thing that you have to be aware of, that whatever rules you put in place, whatever framework you adopt, there are people who are just not gonna buy into that. And for quite a while now, actually, I've been talking about, and I don't see a lot of people. I see a lot of people talk. There are people around that talk about behavioral economics, but I with people that I engage with on a regular basis, for some time I've been saying that agility coaching is behavioral economics. Agility, what we are actually coaching, or what we're putting in place. I might not even say agility coaching, because we've had conversations about how much I identify with being a coach. But what I try and establish in an organization is a choice architecture. So everyone can be very clear about the choices that they're making. I don't always, but if invited to, I'll pass judgment on what choices they are making. But what I try and put in place is an architecture where they can see options, and they can make choices, and they can own the choices that they make. Because otherwise, they're just tolerating behaviors and not trying to do anything. If they're intolerant of them, if they are dissatisfied with the behaviors that they see around them in an organization, they're not actually trying to do anything to change them. And it's like, you have to be deliberate and considered about that. And so for quite a while now, we are students, we're agility coaches. So we say to people, like, this is a learning journey. It's, can you learn quicker than your competitor? And we talk about the scientific method. We talk about, can you observe? Can you try something? Can you experiment? Can you learn from it? And there were loads of people, loads of business books, loads of keynotes, loads of videos that we put in front of people, and we put in front of ourselves, and we try and skill ourselves up and learn more stuff. But for a good long while now, I've been following a lot of behavioral economists and behavioral scientists, You know, the likes of Dan Kahneman is a big name around the agility coaching space, I think. But like Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler, the people who write books like Nudge and well, I'm thinking Fast and Slow and Noise. And I just think what we're trying to do is I think the people who do really well at what we do, which is why I'm trying to be like that, are the people who understand you can put frameworks, you can put rules, you can put, you know, that are benevolent, that are good ideas to follow, and these principles and these values, you can put them in front of people. And you might have from certain people saying, yes, I can sign up to that. But one of my favorite quotes, as you'll know, Dan, Sanjay, you're getting to know this, is it's just the whole people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So getting people to change how they go about what they're doing, that's the experiments that I'm trying to run all the time. Like, and so, like you said there again, it's like me and Kanban. Like, but and I introduced Kanban, and when I'm introducing Kanban, people sort of like it's quite accessible. People will know about it. If I say the word Kanban, by the time I draw my next breath, they can gonna Googled it. They can gonna seen it. Oh, it's a way of delivering stuff, and you're going to teach us how to deliver. You're here to tell us how to deliver stuff, and you can always get some pushback on that because it's like, who are you to tell us how to deliver stuff? Because they think I'm just here to like, you know, we're going to deliver stuff quicker, and this is this process, and it's like actually it's just my way of starting to understand the system that you're in and why you're behaving like you behave, and why you say the things you say, and why you're engaged or disengaged. And it's just something for me to see that in. And I'm not here necessarily to make you work quicker, to keep you highly utilized, this, that, and the other. I'm actually here to try and change how you make decisions, to move closer to what you've said would satisfy you, and get further away from all the things that you say dissatisfy you. And I think that is behavioral change.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, but I think a lot of people don't actually give all of this much thought. I think a lot of times and that's why sometimes we may come across as overthinkers of different challenges, right? Because we seem too brainy about our approach and how we break things down and talk about behavioral sciences, when it's just like, I just don't like that guy. I'm never going to like that guy. You're not going to get me to like that guy. And that's it. You know what I mean? And so,
yeah, well, so one of the interesting things about that, like the thing about that is that I'm okay with them thinking that Kanban is a process thing and he's here to teach us Kanban. What usually happens is if I can engage them in that, and this is happening at the moment, actually, in the client that I'm in, 6 months down the line, they start to tell me the things that I was trying to get them to 6 months prior. I have not told them all those things, but I know that it's working because they're saying it to me. And that's the payoff. I think one of the things we've done an episode about what we do being lonely. And part of the loneliness is you have to keep people at arm's length, because what's interesting is people want to know. They want to know all the inside. Give me the inside track. I don't withhold stuff on me. But like you say, Sanjay, if you told them everything, they'd be like, oh, what are you trying to do? It's more humane to not tell them, take them on the ride, try and keep them engaged with the ride. And then when they're actually getting there, they'll turn around to you and tell you that they're starting to see it differently. And I think at the point where, at different points where they're saying to you, I'm sort of getting this now and I'm getting that. Oh, actually, and doing this, it has a wider impact, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And then you start talking about that wider impact, because then they can engage you with it. I completely agree. Too much up front just puts people off. Because why should they have to know? I don't think they have to know. They don't have to know it all. Because I don't want to know it all. In other subjects that are out there in the world, I don't want to know everything. But that's why I'm good at this, because I want to know about this, and so I can help with this. But I don't want to overwhelm people.
I don't know if this gets into too much to the office politics thing. We want to have that conversation, but I'm going to throw it out there. And if it's too much in it, we'll do something else. I've got another point, but when you talk about that, what sticks in my craw is, so what I don't like about Sunstein and Thaler and Nudge is that I think there's, when, like Matt, when you say, it's benevolent. Well, it's benevolent in your mind, right? It's benevolent in your, so as an example, I know that Nudge talks about things like, hey, if you make retirement savings an opt out instead of an opt in, more people save. And we believe that's good. But as we were talking about before we hit record, that's your moral judgment that that's good, not theirs. And there's a certain manipulation that's involved. Like, okay, we're going to do this because we know statistically certain people aren't going to. So by not being upfront with people, you're imposing your moral view of the world and manipulating them to do what you want, right? This is a view. I'm saying there's a viewpoint of, hey, you have now manipulated these people to do what you want. And isn't that also bad? Because you've chosen something for them, and now without any thought on their part, they're choosing what you want, which is not necessarily what they would have chosen, right? If world open to them, like you have a choice left or right, I'm going to do things that make you choose right, even though you may have chosen left if left to your own devices.
Well, so I'd say it's slightly different from that. What they're saying is, if you don't choose, something will happen. And that was the case beforehand. If you don't choose, something will happen. But what we're saying is we're going to change what happens if you don't choose. But you always have the choice. So I think it's a little bit, but this is like a behavioral economics thing that, I'm not really setting up things like that when I go into an organization, because, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But in an organization, there are a lot of times people make choices on your behalf that you disagree with. So maybe I do I absolutely manipulate people. People are being manipulated all of the time. They absolutely are. And again, like that's a politics thing. Politics exists everywhere, whether you engage in it or not.
But
that is partially a choice, but then it's a choice of, the choice you're making often is to not engage because you're put off by it.
Yeah, but there's a grander magnet to how people behave. There's a bigger magnet for everybody, and that's tied to individually what your intrinsic motivation is. Why are you there? Are you there to collect a check? Right. And so if you're there to collect a check, more times than not, your threshold for accepting certain things that you're not down with are going to be greater because you need that check. Right. And you don't maybe have an alternative. Same as if your intrinsic motivation is your career, you're going to take a lot more shit than you usually would have to, because you know that it's going to help you in this specific context or organization ascend to where you need to get. If you just hunker down and keep your mouth shut, and do as you're told, right?
So in those situations, and they're all shades of gray, obviously there are lots of different scenarios in between that exist around those scenarios that you just picked. But it's a hypothesis that doing that thing will serve you well. Like, if I just keep my head down in the future, I won't be seen as a troublemaker and I'll get this. That's my hypothesis. As the time goes by, that is tested, and actually could just be looked.
I agree. It's a hypothesis they make based on what they've heard or seen or
experienced.
Right. Experience, right? Usually when you go to, and that's why when you go from one company to another, like the way things work, when you get that breakdown, that first conversation where, somebody actually is kind enough to you to say, okay, dude, like, this is totally like, I know this is what the procedure manual says, or when you were onboarded, but I'm just telling you, when you go to that room over there, don't touch this or don't do that or whatever. Like, there's always that conversation that happens. If you're lucky enough, you have it within the first few weeks. If you're not, then
well, again, so what's interesting about that?
On your own. So my point is, like, I think, again, going back to the relationship between culture and people's intrinsic motivation. I think that cloud of culture is basically how things work, is very much a sort of an impetus to how you're going to behave. Now, the amount of courage you have in your own personal intrinsic motivation, whether it's collecting a check, the amount of freedom you have, saving planet Earth, or whatever that is gonna either, you know, bind you to that culture or continually fill up, leads you, you know, push you to that threshold until you figure out, okay, this is not the place for me. And that's why you've got people that won't hesitate leaving. All of they've gone through a very painstaking process, right? Gone through 3, 4, 5 rounds of interviews over a few months, right? Done a psych test. But then within the first 3 months, they're like, dude, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this, right? Because, you know, what I've been sold and what I find here does not, you know, and so I don't want to go through that behavioral change to adapt. And then while there's other people who, because they have other constraints or there's other motivators intrinsically, are ready to deal with that pile of whatever it is or what seems normal for everybody else. So I think, again, I think there's a bigger, and that's why, you know, you see a clear difference in terms of, you know, again, behavioral economics and for-profit organizations, right, who are about that bottom line, and that's what our ethos, our purpose is, and nonprofit, who have like a higher, quote unquote, a higher calling or something
that's not my experience.
No. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think you still do see, you know, the same type of behaviors, but they're manifested differently is what I mean. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, so I think, yeah, there are different behaviors there, and I think there are generally different cultures, which is sort of like the manifestation of behaviors, thought, and a myriad of things. But I think the things like what can influence behavioral economics or things like that, actually just a deep human level, and you can still, the manipulation can still be there.
Yeah.
The same manipulations will affect you, but basically, I think, you know, yeah, they're different cultures because different types of people are generally attracted into groups in those things. So the manipulations manifest themselves differently.
Right.
And on that manipulations thing, because manipulation generally is seen as a bad thing, even though it happens all the time everywhere. Like you were saying earlier, Sanjay, what I was going to say, sorry, when I was trying to interrupt you, and I apologize, was that you talked about someone finding someone who gave them the inside knowledge on what to do when they go into that room, which is a manipulation. I'm going to tell you what I think you should do in that room. And that could save that person's career. It could give them a huge boost in confidence. It could allow them to go into that room and shine and come out thinking, yes, I'm so glad I listened to that person. Or it might not, but it's a manipulation. So our social interactions are manipulations. That person giving you that knowledge changes you in some way. And so with the Thaler stuff, generally, you dead right, Dan. It is a manipulation, but we are manipulating one another all the time. What I would like to get back to, though, was what we started, because this has been a great conversation, but if it veers off too much, it goes into another conversation, is that we talk about it's all about the people. The thing is, the people create the processes.
Yeah.
And like we're saying about the manipulation, like in the Thaler sort of model, like we were saying there, is like if you don't opt in or out, if you don't engage, the choice is made that money will be put to one side. That's what we've done. That's the manipulation. And that's the thing about process and frameworks, is that, the general rule is going to be this. So it could be like the organization's made a decision. Last week, you were a business analyst. Now you're a product owner. Last week you did,
which is terrible, by the way.
Waterfall. This week you're doing Scrum.
But what's the intent, though? I think, I mean, maybe it's just me. Am I wrong for giving manipulation a
pejorative sort of angle, a bad angle?
That's what I'm saying. So if your intent, like going back to the example that I was sharing, that you jumped up, then piggybacked on, and I gave, which was like when you get onboarded and the guy tells you, hey, when you go to that room, don't do this, otherwise this will happen.
Yeah.
Like if your intent is to just share, to give the guy kind of just pointers as to like kind of warning signs, I don't feel like that's manipulation. I feel like that's just sharing, or, you know, like, hey, do what you will with this, but I'm letting you know this is in the past. This is what's happened when you exhibit this type of behavior in that room. So
Yeah.
there's no manipulation there. You're just giving that guy. Now, if you have an intent to really coerce somebody's behavior for a specific outcome that you may benefit from or other people may benefit from, that's where I think there's manipulation. But I think if you're just, you know, the same way, like if a company goes, hey, you're not a product owner anymore and you're in business analyst now, there's clearly usually an intent there. And it's usually around cutting cost because,
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so that's where the manipulation comes from. But I think if you're just, you know, I mean, if again, you know, so I think, you know,
Yeah.
there's
So there's things that you can choose to follow, and there is
right.
things that you can't choose to follow.
Yeah.
I think that loops them back round to it's all about the people and not the
Mm-hmm.
frameworks and
Yeah.
not those
Oh yeah,
processes.
for sure.
Whereby, like what we're
Boy,
saying, naturally, it always comes back to, and this is the thing I often say with people. I mean, we've not even let you have a look in yet, Dan. We've got to have a draw breath to let you talk about it.
no, that's fine. No, good. I love
But
the
it's like
conversation.
they will decide whatever. So you can say last week you were a project manager, this week you're a scrum master. But actually, they can choose not to. And they like the opting in or opting out of paying into a pension and changing that so that, well, if you don't make a choice, you're opting in, from if you don't make a choice, you were opting out. It's this week you're a scrum master, but actually people will ignore you and they will vote with their feet and they will cover their tracks and you won't get the outcome that you want. So it's not if you implement an intent, like you say, an intentless process, you'll get what you ask for.
Yeah.
If you have an intent and go about implementing, you could say co-creating, or you could say actually just making the decision, and you've got a highly engaged set of people and they know why you're doing it, then you've got more chance of them jumping on. But you're still, I think the thing about what we do is we're there looking to see where people have said something and not done something, where people have said, yes, I'm in. And it's like, okay, I'm going to watch you. And like, I think I said this in one of our recent conversations about James Baldwin, the American civil rights activist, playwright, I think, lived in Paris. He said about being a black man in America at the time where before he emigrated to Paris to just have a better life, when he was treated with more respect. People said to him, like, you know, you've got a lot more than your ancestors. You know, you've got a lot more. You're supported more by society and all. So you got so much more than your ancestors had. But he's like, I can't believe what you say because I can see what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, it's like you'll put some rules around people. People like us are like, okay, we'll put these rules. What people like us will go like, here's some rules that are generative and good. What we actually sort of say, we try and get people to choose them, to pull them from us. Sometimes organizations push them at people. We know enough to know that push or pull, you still got to wait and observe and see how that manipulation manifests itself, takes effect on the person's behavior, not what they say,
Well,
what they then end up doing.
and I think that gets to, you know, so I think we sort of have violent agreement that it's all about the people. I mean, ultimately it comes, I mean, whether or not, now how you go about that is, there's a difference. Like, do you start with the people or you start with the process? Somehow it gets there. But still, I think there's an element of, like when we're talking about what's good or where there's intent, it really comes down to there's a moral code there, right? And there's a morality. And I don't, again, as I said before we hit record, I'm not talking about Christianity, Islam, you know, Judaism. I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about a moral code that says we believe good and bad. Like when we start using words of good and bad, there is a morality in that. And you have to have a shared morality for cultures to survive. And that shared morality, there's some percentage probably, and I haven't studied enough to know. But when I talk about it's all about people, and when you talk about how does that manipulation take hold, I think in part the way it takes hold is based on what is the unspoken shared morality. And so when I talk about it's all about people, I say, okay, we need to start from people, because the problem is never the process. Where things get hung up is not the process. It gets hung up in between our ears when we start implementing those things, when the manipulation takes hold. That's where we have disagreements. And when we get people to choose, and this is where you get to topics like psychological safety, is you have to normalize the actual conversation about that, about, hey, so maybe, I'm seeing through these manipulations that we're moving towards a culture that maybe if I stand back and look, I'm like, hey, I used to work for a company that did this, and now it seems like we do this. And my moral code says this is not good. I don't like this. And instead of saying, oh, well, you're now outside, like you're outside, you just move on, to normalize the conversation of saying, hey, I'm noticing this. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think part of the role of a good coach is helping those people through that situation. Now, that may mean that you help them see that, hey, this is where it's moving, and the morality, call it 60-70% of the people are moving towards that direction. They agree. So now so now you can choose. Do you want to stay somewhere where you don't jibe with the moral code, or do you want to go somewhere where you do? And I think that's a healthy conversation. But I think we hide it so often, and we put it behind rules and process, and people, it leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, instead of just saying, hey, look, we're evolving a different way. And I think how you deal with the people in those moments is critical. And it's what leads to either a successful change or a not successful change. Are you forcing it down people's throats, or are you helping people deal with the fact that this change is going on? Right. And I'll also add that when you talk about behavioral economics, right, if you look at the founders of that field of study, and you look to Carnegie Mellon in the United States, right, Carnegie Mellon University, that field of study was a combining of psychology and economics, right? And these two departments started working together and saying, hey, it isn't just about these numbers and this economics and supply and demand and optimization. There's actually like people involved in this. And so you have to think about the psychology of it, and you marry the two, and now you've got behavioral economics, right?
What do you think though about, so you said the problem's never the process. I think we're going to agree on this, but I'll say it in a different way, that the problem's always the process. The manifestation of the problem, of the symptom of a bad process, will show up in the people, which is one of those things, like why it's always the people. But I would say, like, you know, when you're working in big organizations, when you're working in teams, and that's how you're creating, the thing is, like, you can't separate them. Your people need processes. The people need sets of rules. They need agreements. They need to know what's going on. They need boundaries. They need, you know, in business and a lot in life and in society. Reminds me of Seinfeld episodes where George Costanza and even
we're living in a society.
We're living in a society. Yeah, exactly. There are rules. You know, I don't think you can separate them. But I think one of the problems that we have is that we can't reconcile ourselves to the fact that processes and rules are compromise. And so, and we have to compromise if we're going to get along. But what we should do is, why the people are so important, is that that's where the effect of the process, or the effect of the impact of the process manifests itself. So you have to watch those people to see what is the problem with the process. Because what I want to believe is that there are fewer problems with people than there are with the effect the process is having on them. And I think we do these things is that we use that so that we can say to people, look, this process isn't working. In the places where people work that they don't have as much fun is the process rules, and the process never gets changed, and the people get told you're doing it wrong.
Mm.
And I think
I think
really
when
it should be that the effect is showing up in you. Let's change this process so we have a better effect.
But when you look at the process, right? You know, and I talk to, and this might get into office political stuff, but you know, you talk about democracy works, you know, and free markets, democracy, these things work in a place where you have a moral people and a people that agree on a moral framework. Yeah, and so you look at something like if I took a framework of, say, democracy, and I tried to make that work in, I don't know, say Russia, it doesn't work very well, right? It doesn't work very well because they have intrinsic
Depends
things
on
of
what you call
culture.
democracy, though. Because I don't
Sure,
know what we're
you know,
doing in some of these countries is democracy anymore. Really, I mean, if you look at
yeah,
so that's why I said that it's again, and that's why I went back to the intent. And I'll let you
yeah.
finish and I'll jump back on.
Well,
I
but
think
that goes to like when the United States has, you know, there are times, and we probably are still in it, where we have this notion of we're going to go and spread democracy across the world. Well, guess what? It doesn't work in some cultures. Like that just isn't how they operate.
and that's
And I
not
go
really
back
our
to I
intent.
post.
That's not really
Sure.
our intent.
I go back, I look at, I posted the other day about how, you know, on LinkedIn about how, you know, I go for a walk and there's a stretch of my sidewalk where there's overgrowth and it's really the city's responsible. I went out there and did it. And my point of the post was like in business, just go, sometimes just take action, just go do the thing. Like I was worried, like, am I going to get stopped by cops? Is someone going to call and say, this guy's out there trimming back things that don't belong to him? Potentially. And I thought, well, what's worse going to happen? But like go out and just do it. But that's also a very American perspective. Like you look at de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, talks about how there's a problem and somebody gets a group of people together and they go solve it. There's no bureaucrats involved. And this is sort of mind blowing to de Tocqueville, you know, French philosopher. And so culturally, there are just someone chimed in and was like, well, hey, I grew up in a place where taking action was sort of frowned upon. And so I was scared to like go take action because that just was something you didn't do it. And so that's what I'm talking about. You have these different views, and yeah, they're malleable over time, but trying to go and install a process or a framework or whatever you want to call the thing without considering the people, it doesn't work because the people can reject that body, that system can reject it. And so you have to find the right place and you have to be willing to, let's say, Matt could be the world's biggest proponent of Kanban. He could go try and implement it somewhere and it can absolutely fail miserably. And that isn't Matt's fault. It just, the system rejected it because it was never going to work there. And so if we don't consider the people and we don't consider, and, you know, consider things like Matt's saying, an experiment, and we understand how that manipulation takes hold and how all like we lose. So back to my point of it's all about the people. But I
Yeah.
also, yes, I get the process point of Matt's. So I know, Sanjay, you wanted to come in.
Here's where I think I may disagree with both of you.
Brilliant.
Oh, good. I like it.
This is and then I think we're looking at an equation where we're looking at process or culture, and a bunch of process create, I guess, culture or the sort of a way of doing things, and then people. And I think the juxtaposition of both of those is leadership. And I think, you know, leadership is what gave you like a form that was, you know, you stepping out and going and fixing that thing right in the middle of the street. That was a form of leadership that was afforded to you, right? Because of your experience and culturally showing up in that way, right? In that form of leadership is a good thing, right? Being proactive, you know, stepping up, you know, neighborhood watches. And those are things that are very synonymous with, you know what I mean? Like, different elements of sort of American culture, but then and they show up in other ways and in other places, right? I love this video. I don't think I've ever shared it to you guys, but it talked about basically Cascade Troves. Cascade Troves talking about basically the effects of, it's called how the rivers change Yellowstone, right?
Yeah.
Right. And
So the wolves,
right, with the wolves,
introducing the wolves. Yeah.
introducing the wolves and sort of showing how even within the pack of wolves, their behaviors were dictated by their overall intent, which was
Oh.
the environment, but their overall intent and how that intent shaped their behaviors and how that, group, their mission, their credo, their purpose was to survive. Right. And in that survival, you know, there's always that visual image of, you show wolves and they show, how the one in the front has a specific purpose. He's the weakest one because he's probably hurt or injured or something. Right. And then they show the ones in the middle who are potentially the strongest ones because they can protect, right, the cubs and the female wolves. And then you have the leader who's way in the back, kind of like maybe some distance back, because he's the guy who's kind of watching everything and enforcing, right, and being exemplary or whatever the case may be. So just with that example, you see that there is definitely processes and rules to where even how, they're set up in their line, right?
But I think that has been fact checked, and that has been
Disputed.
yeah.
Okay.
That picture doesn't show that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
okay. So my point being, I do believe that there is a coefficient of leadership that does shape or that does bridge the relationship between, right, people and how they have the courage to show up or are allowed to show up, right?
Yeah.
And the processes that dictate that, right? And that's all
Yeah.
driven, and that's all, and that's how revolutions are created, right? There's some intent. This way of living does not fit us anymore, right? We need to change it. And there's
Yeah.
some, right? There's a driving force that creates that. And that driving force is changing the way we live so we can better survive or whatever the case may be. I think for organizations, it's the same thing. I think until you have the draw a line between that intent, that broader why, then you have either motivation to change or to coerce people to join that, right, that mold of how we behave, and that then, allows for certain process to be either readily adopted or not. I think what happens is a lot of times, then it's going back, I wish I didn't have to, but it sticks out of my mind because you mentioned that, when we say we're going to go share democracy, we're going to go put democracy or back to the colonial period when, the imperial countries went to Africa or Asia or whatever. So I was just watching Shogun on Netflix,
Yeah.
right?
On Disney.
Great
Yeah.
series, by the way. And you saw that, that intent was manipulation, was true manipulation, because they used religion when their intent was really resources, right? Resources and influence and right. And so
Yeah.
and so that you saw a clear change of behavior, not only through them as they got to know the people, because they started to develop empathy, right? The Portuguese and in English, et cetera, versus and even the, well, in the case of Shogun, the Japanese started to change their behavior because they started coming into contact and challenging even their view of how they saw the world or whatever the case may be. But then that outlier was really, again, that intent. It still was to live a specific way, to have a certain amount of, respect for one another. Whereas, if you're the English bloke that came off the St. Mary's ship, your intent was to bring back as many resources as you can and help Queen Mary come in and and win this war against the Portuguese. So again, that's why I think that greater intent is really important. I think in a lot of societies where there's been a lot, and we're right in the middle of that right now, like that overall intent, whether it's we want a for-profit society that's free market and, you work what you can, you get what you work for, you work your butt off and you get what you can, versus other sides who say, hey, I need to have a basic right to healthcare, to education, to food, right? And minimal amount of credit or resources. And
Yeah.
then, whatever. So there's a clear clash in terms of the intent and the why, and then how we're going to get there. And that's why you see such, extremes in a lot of, a lot of the Western societies right now, where, there's rising of the far right and rising of the far left as well. And you have the, extremes clashing. So I think, again, that intent, that why, that then drives behavior and then creates the right type of processes that are allowed, or whatever the case may be. We're right in the middle of that clash. And I think that's why our job is so passionate, right? Because we're right in the middle of holding up that mirror that shows the sort of the gap between what you say you are, that's on your mission statement or whatever, and what you're actually doing, and the type of behaviors that you're allowing, promoting, and right, which that you're even promoting by your own behavior.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you know what I mean? So I think that's I think so, and that's why I said leadership, because I think leadership is in charge some way of continuously highlighting that intent, that why, the necessity to whatever that collective purpose is, right? As a, whether it be an organization, as a sovereign nation, whatever, that's fun.
Well, I would
Is that
say
your wrap up?
if you look at leaders over time, right, the leaders that ultimately get revered throughout history, I would argue, part of the reason, a big part of the reason that they're revered is because people look at them and say they were, men or women of good character. Like the things that, Rosa Parks on the bus, like, was a leader, but
Yeah.
because she was a woman of good character, right? And it was a character. Like, we look at her and say she was a woman of good character. We look at someone like George Washington, the stories of. I know I'm very Americanizing these things, but these are the stories that stick in my head. There's probably others that you all can come up with. I cannot tell a lie. It was, I cut down the tree. Like, we see these people of good character, and so ultimately, even leadership to me comes down to it is about people, and starting from a framework of being a good human is the fundamental building block that gives you entry to do the other things.
Mm.
So,
I mean, you've had great leaders that were not so good people either, or because I mean, the good is
sure.
right. The good is always very subjective, right? Because it depends on your, like you said, your sort of, system of values, right? If it obviously, I don't know. I mean, to some people, Stalin was not a, you know, I think there's no debate that he was a great leader in terms of his ability to lead, because, for what he did. But the effects or the results, people might digress on, whether he made the right choices or where he was leading people. Same with Mao Zedong, right? And in China, and he created a movement, right? That ushered in, the space China is in right now. And so, and again, I keep going back to these historical figures, but I mean, there's tons. Steve Jobs, same thing. Was he a great human being? There's more and more stories that come out that he was a complete, back to our episode, assholes, right? No assholes allowed. He was a complete a-hole most of the time, because that's, I guess, what he felt he had to do. But he had a vision, and people were ready to, join in and throws behind that vision. And I think later on in his life, he obviously, as he was towards the tail end of his life, talked about the importance of family and all these different things. So he very much, I'm pretty sure, matured to something that, I think brought him to being a better, decent human being, or whatever the case be. I didn't know the guy, but so
Yeah.
I think you can be a great leader, and I think it's your ability to inspire and draw Napoleon, another figure, right? So so I think it's like, leadership is great as in how it shows up and inspires people to follow. Now, you can follow a madman, right? For sure, because if he fires
And
you up
people
and out,
have throughout history.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's been great coaches in the NFL or in football and Premier League, complete, right? But they're able to, for that given amount of time, short period of time, they can jolt up enough inspiration and energy in people to where, right, and they'll get those immediate results. They may not be very long standing. Thinking of Mourinho in the Premier League, so Matt, so who actually, usually has 2 years, and then his welcome is pretty much his welcome time is gone. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so yeah, I do think leadership and your ability to constantly remind people and energize people of that intent, which then shapes behaviors and then the processes. I think that's the huge coefficient for me.
Are we wrapping up?
Yeah, I think so.
Should I do mine?
I mean, I've sort of said my thing. So if you got final words.
Hey, go for it, man. I think yeah.
So I've agreed with a lot of what's gone on, and it's been quite nice that there's been some disagreement as well. I think with what's just been said about leadership, I think that, like, leadership springs from everywhere, and I can't quote de Tocqueville, but it's nice that you you mentioned someone that was outside the United States there, Dan. That was quite expansive of you. But there is a thing that the Tocqueville was surprised that the revolution happened. And that again was the actually like so the people at the top of that revolution, the people who the leaders, as it were, put in place some things that could provoke a revolution, and they were mostly all surprised. The same with, I think Lenin was surprised by the Russian Revolution, because the people took hold of it. And there were certain triggers, which are like behavioral science, certain triggers that made that happen. And so I go back to what you said right at the beginning. It is all about the people. People select processes. Sometimes the processes run ahead of people because the people choose, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And they'll just go for it. So, you know, if you want success, it's about getting the people to these things that you put in front of, these plans, these processes, these ways of working. If they really grasp them, they'll make it a success. If they don't, and I think this is a big thing, if they don't, they can make it seem like they are, and they don't, and they won't, and you won't be successful. So you just have to be really careful of that, I think. We did veer into a bit of global politics there. I managed to keep a lid on my, but what I would say about that, when you were picking like these global leaders and stuff like that, like there were people like, for me, that's interesting about why I don't think it's all about leadership, and maybe in the same way that you might hope for or describe, Sanjiri, is that, so the one I would pick out is like, or the two that I would pick out and compare would be two Nobel laureates, Nobel Peace Prize winners. One being Nelson Mandela, who just embodied what a Nobel Peace Prize winner would do in office when given the ability to then set a direction for a nation. And unfortunately, like Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, won the Nobel Peace Prize for sticking to her principles and so on, then got given power, and then that ended up in tragedy. And the thing about that is that then, you know, some of that, like you say, is like there's a great influence from leadership, but ultimately, like Dan started this conversation with, this, it's all about the people. So that ran riot. The people, like with de Tocqueville, like with the Russian Revolution, like with the French Revolution, the people just picked those up and ran with it. And that's why the people will always win. And in the case of those revolutions, the people architecting that at the top were blown away by the, geez Louise, we didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah. Because
the people will kill it or let it live. They'll bring about the result. So, and I go back to, like, our job is to be there, observing, working out how it's going, and nudging in a benevolent manner.
See, what's interesting about that is, you know, it's a whole other conversation, is so if that's our role, how do you measure that? Because how am I measured on success? I'm not responsible for the outcome, right? I mean, we're putting stuff in place, and we really don't know how it's going to take hold in this, specifically in this corporation. It may or may not work, and because it is about the people, and it is about how they take it and all these things. Like, how can you possibly be responsible for that? Like, you can be responsible for observing it and seeing how it's going and holding a mirror, but you certainly can't be responsible for, does it get them to where they had intended to go, because where they intended to go may not work.
Well, when we get together next time, should we pick it up from there?
Yeah. I think so.
Because that is a great conversation. Because
that's a great conversation.
On social media in the past few weeks, people have said about, I'm worried that I can't describe my value as a coach. And I think what you've just said there is one way of describing your value as a coach.
Yeah. How do you measure influence, which is our job?
Yeah. So let's do that next time.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cheers, fellas.
Next time on Flane, how to measure your value.
Let's do it.
Thanks for joining us today on Flane, available wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, you know what to do.